What's up, everyone, and welcome to the TCG Cast. We are here today to sit down on our fourth community spotlight. We have our board game expert and host of the Synced Up Pod, Timothy Dorrough, joining us today.
I wouldn't call myself a board game expert.
Well,
I would call myself a board game fan. But yeah, I'm the host of the Synced Up podcast, doing fun stuff over there.
and Suriel Vazquez, one of the co-hosts over at Minn Max. You'll probably know him very well. But for the people that don't know you, Suriel, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me. I am a video game writer critic, I think is probably the best way to describe it. I've been doing reporting and criticism and features and stuff about video games for a little over 12 years or so. Just various places freelance, and then I worked at Game Informer for a while, and then helped start up Minn Max, where we just do a bunch of podcast videos, discussions about stuff, and I still do a lot of freelance reviews on the side.
Nice. Yeah, that's where I first heard you. I first heard about you over at Game Informer a couple years ago. I think you came onto one of the pods.
That's probably where most people heard about
it. And then just followed you there along with Ben.
That's what I did, of course, too, is jump on over to Minn Max from Game Informer. I started listening to like gaming podcasts because I deliver mail. That's like my job or whatever. And so most people know that, but I could fit it in because you're just out there delivering mail. And so I was just picking up as many gaming podcasts as possible. And then Ben, of course, I think Ben is a great host, and his banter and his humor is very, very on brand for me, very funny. And then of course enjoyed all the guys over there, you included. And then when you of course jumped ship from Game Informer, went over to Minn Max, that was a whole thing. But y'all kept up the stuff over there, and that was really fun. And I really enjoy the Minn Max show, and I enjoy your input, especially on fighting games and stuff of that nature, because for me, like, I'm not really like well versed in that area, so to getting your perspective on it, like, honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I listen to the Minn Max show specifically not specifically for this, but in terms of fighting games specifically, to get your input, to know whether or not should I play this game, should I give it a shot if I'm not super into fighting games, like, is this something I should do? Like, you're really the end all be all in terms of fighting game opinions in my personal, me personally.
So, as someone who basically used podcasts the same way, of just like, I have this kind of crummy low wage job, I may as well listen to podcasts during. They don't pay me enough to not do that. I'm glad that our show is that for other people. So that's really nice to hear, and I appreciate, like, I've been playing fighting games for a while. I almost kind of fell into covering them because I just played a lot of Street Fighter, but I wasn't like good at it. But I think at some point people were looking for esports stuff, and I just happened to watch a bunch of Street Fighter streams, like Evo stuff, and I ended up like being pretty knowledgeable about that scene. And so I just started pitching things about, like, here's what's going on in this kind of subsection, and as a result of that, I started playing more fighting games and taking them more seriously. So it is kind of this weird kismet of, like, the thing, my job basically allowed me to dive into them more deeply.
I wish I could get into them more. I'm just terrible at hitting inputs. That's my problem. I can't hit inputs. That's why I play Smash Bros. Because Smash Bros, it's just like left, right, up, down. Use the B button, use the A button, use the right stick. So I'm like, I play this, and I miss input in that game enough, so I just can't play another game.
That's totally fair. I'm at the point where, like, Smash Brothers is the most intimidating one for me, not because it's like difficult to play, but I think you kind of get to like a ceiling in Smash Brothers of, like, you have to learn all these, like, very very fine techniques of, like, okay, well, it's technically not a long input, but it's a thing you have to do a lot. So, like, things like adjusting your positioning and DIing or whatever. A lot of that stuff, it can be kind of intimidating for me. But, like, on a simple, like, I'm just playing it with my friends, messing around, like, Smash Brothers is probably the most inviting.
I love Smash Bros. It's great.
Yeah, I think I started following you around when you were like the MOBA guy. Because I don't know, for whatever reason, it's like kind of taboo to talk about MOBAs in like gaming podcasts, just because they all kind of coalesce into the same thing essentially.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
like,
very easy for people to like see that genre, and because all of the games look the same, and to
mhm.
someone who's not versed in them,
Mhm.
they may as well be. But yeah, I think that was the other thing that I fell into was covering Dota a lot. Like a lot, I think one of my earliest pitched articles was about matchmaking in Dota 2.
Mhm.
So then that was just a thing where like I basically just spent a year in college not going to class and just playing that game instead. So uh, I, I didn't fail any classes, but I definitely was like not you know uh learning anything because I was like looking up strategies while in class and stuff. And that eventually like led to kind of a similar deal where I knew a lot about how people played it and had ideas for articles about it. So that ended up helping out a lot.
So
Yeah.
are you mechanically skilled in Dota, or are you like
I
me?
I used to be okay. Like there was a period of time where I was very obsessed with Dota Buff, which was the stat tracking site for Dota. Um, and I at one point I was in like they stratify matches in like I think now it's like normal, high, and very high. I used to be low, normal,
Mhm.
and high, and I used to. There was a period of time where I was at the very high tier, which is still isn't like top tier or anything, but there was a point where I was playing it regularly enough to be involved in like tournament leagues and stuff.
Mhm.
Not professionally, but like just for fun. But I think at one point I was pretty good at Dota. I don't play it as much anymore, so I'm probably bad at it now. But it's still a thing where they just announced like they have that battle pass, and I still spent way too much money to get skins that I'm probably not going to use.
Yeah.
But I still go
Is the
in and check
curse.
it. Yeah, check in every once in a while.
Yeah,
I
that's how I
wish
am with. Oh, go ahead.
I wish I could get into Dota. I tried Dota for the first time
Yeah, we all
2
tried
days
it.
ago, 3
Huh?
days ago. Was it 2 or 3 days ago? I can't remember. Man, that is an overwhelming game. Like there is a lot going on in that game. And I'm not like the MOBA guy or nothing like that because they're no, I mean they're a niche genre, I would say. Well, they're not niche. I mean, League had the most popular esport on Twitch there last year, but like it's just a bit more complicated for my tastes. But Dota, man, I look at that screen, I have no idea what's going on. There's
You
just so much
definitely
going on here.
you need a long period of time where you're not really doing anything else to really learn Dota well.
Yeah,
Like you need to be dedicated to it, but it is for me it definitely worth it.
I love Dota.
I've played
Or
League for
not
so
Dota.
many years, and I think I'm along the same lines as you. Is like when I first started, I could have been in the pros if I really wanted to, and now I can barely climb out of bronze.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I could coach it real well because I have so much understanding of that game. But if you put me in
Yeah.
front of that mouse and keyboard, man, I will shit the bed quick.
Yeah, I'm terrible with the mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, my favorite. I see my fans and my friends and my family would be upset with me if I didn't ask this question because it'd be so on brand for me. Did you play Paragon?
I've played a couple of matches of Paragon. I haven't played. I didn't play it seriously or regularly much.
Paragon, oh man, Paragon was my. It was the only game like in terms of like MOBAs that I played like a lot of. I put like hundreds of hours into Paragon in the 2 years that it was out, and it getting canceled was like the saddest day of my life. And I probably bring up Paragon every single day, asking for it to come back. And I know it's not coming back. You know, big money. Fortnite's gonna keep pumping out the dollars for Epic, but man, I loved Paragon, and it was I think I don't know if it was the art style or the deck building aspect of it or something about it just was a little more accessible to me. And it's the only game in my entire life that I played consistently for like a long time because you know a lot of people can get into like like you with Dota or people with like Destiny 2. They have those games as a service games that they can play like a lot of, like tons of. And I could never get into one for more than like a couple weeks. Like I very much have like this problem of just not being able to do it. I just fall off very aggressively and then I switch to like the next thing, even if it's a single player game, like Assassin's Creed. Those are hundreds of hours. I get halfway through and then the next thing's out and then I never touch it again. It's just a problem that I have. But not Dota, Paragon was the only game that broke that mold and I played a ridiculous amount of it. It might have helped that I was good at it. I think that
Yeah.
I was able to get kills and stuff, but all right,
Yeah, I
played a little
think
bit of Paragon, I'll take it.
the thing about genres like that, like evergreen games and MOBAs and competitive games, is that I feel like everyone has their one that they get really into, but I
Mhm.
don't think there are as many people who, unless you kind of like work in the industry and stuff, I think most people just get into one and then they stick with that one. Like I think for, with like loot games, for me, it's Destiny. Like I like Destiny a lot, and I feel knowledgeable when I review stuff like it, but I think Destiny's been almost the exception of like, oh, usually like the grind is kind of a little much for me, but in Destiny I enjoy it. And like with Dota is kind of a similar thing where I played some League, and I've played quite a bit of Heroes of the Storm, but like they, everyone has different tastes, and so a lot of games just don't hit as they don't hit right. And so like something like Dota is like, okay, this is the exact kind of formula that I'm looking for, whereas other people might just have different flavors. So I don't think there are a lot of people who are like, oh yeah, I play all of them. But maybe I'm wrong.
What would you consider if you had to pick one to be like an entry level for like if you want to get into this genre, one of the most beginner friendly MOBAs?
Pokemon Unite.
Well, yeah, I guess Unite.
I think I was about to say, Pokemon Unite is probably the best MOBA for getting into the genre. I probably would have said Heroes of the Storm a while ago, but I think that game is still running, but it's not as supported. But I think now, Pokemon Unite is definitely the one that you should start with if you're looking to get into that genre, just for like basic feel things, because the rules of that game are very different from traditional MOBAs. But in terms of, okay, I'm running around as this character in like, this Warcraft 3, looking setting. And I'm spamming abilities and stuff with like, these arcs, and like you're seeing the interface for how moves work and stuff like that. And you're leveling up and figuring out how to lane. I think that stuff will translate to other MOBAs once you get into it.
I was enjoying Pokemon Unite. That's why I even attempted to play Dota the other day. Then I realized, oh man, the skill gap between these two games is vast.
Yeah, the ramp is definitely a lot, and it doesn't help that I think they've tried a lot, but the on ramp for Dota is still kind of one of those things where you either have to be really dedicated or you have to have someone
helping you.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we even got slaughtered by the bots.
No, yeah.
Oh yeah, like those bots are surprisingly
and
hard
then
sometimes.
Yeah. I'm over here with the inclination that it'll be like League bots, and I'll go 25-0 in the first 5 minutes, and then I get in there and I'm 0-3 in bot lane, and I'm like, okay, am I gonna scale? What's gonna happen here? And then it was just a big old slugfest between the bots. I'm like, I don't even want to see like the bronze level players, because I'm sure they'll outplay me.
Yeah, I was getting smacked around.
Yeah, but I think I agree with Pokemon Unite being the best entry level MOBA, but it's also pretty exclusive right now because it's not on mobile yet.
Yeah,
once it's on mobile.
Once it's on mobile.
Do they plan to release it on PC at all? Because I feel like that would be a pretty good platform for it to be on.
I don't know. I don't think
knowing
that's
Nintendo,
in the cards.
Probably.
Well, is that Nintendo or is that because we don't Game Freak?
Well, I mean, wouldn't Tencent make the final decision?
Maybe
there's like another. It's like Tencent contracting out to a developer or something.
Yeah,
it's definitely Nintendo's involvement in it seems pretty minimal.
Because if it was up to Nintendo, the answer would most definitely be no. But Tencent, they like money.
Yeah, and Pokemon is the exception in that like they just do whatever. They release a lot of games on phones and stuff. So I could see that coming to PC, but maybe there is some contractual thing of mobile is the only other platform they can release games on.
Yeah, it's slated for Android and iOS in September, and then in March. Wait, no. That's they intend to do crossplay between the two, but there's no talk of PC on here. I play it on PC. It's a fun game. I like it.
Yeah.
One of the questions I had written down: what was it like to finally be back recording in the studio?
Oh yeah. It was weird. It was really cool. I think I had underplayed a little bit how much of the rapport kind of improves when you're in the studio with someone. There's not as much interrupting.
No delay.
There's no delay. So it felt more like we were just having like a conversation that was being recorded versus, just kind of waiting for your turn, which is, a lot of what you do during a podcast. But I definitely missed it. It was really nice to be back in that studio for sure.
Yeah, because over Discord and stuff, it's hard to pick up on like other people's pregnant pauses because of the delay.
Yeah,
I know
just
that was
the tells of when someone's going to talk or not. You can always tell when to stop, especially when hosting. Because I guess I've had the blessing of starting our show, we started it like right after, because that would have been February of 2020. So it was like right before the pandemic. But my roommate is my co-host, and so we didn't have the issue of having to go to like remote, because our studio's just here in like our dining room. It's just built against the wall, and so we lived together, so that didn't cause any problems for us. But there was definitely, we did the one with Bob Beal, watching you guys do the TCG cast every week. It's definitely difficult, and I listening to games daily, and like even all the big players, like it took them a while to even adjust, and you can still tell now that they're not 100% adjusted to all this stuff, constantly talking over each other, interrupting each other, and there's still kinks to work out. But hopefully we'll get a grip on this COVID thing, and we
Yeah, I am glad we were able to make the transition, because even beyond COVID stuff, it can be a little bit more convenient to not have to make the drive out there, and not have a commute is really cool. So I think there are trade-offs there, but I definitely feel the difference, and it seemed like the audience was definitely feeling the difference as well. Terms of,
I was there for it for sure.
We had a lot of comments about like, oh, it's really nice that you guys are able to record live and in person now.
Is it a long? Are y'all spread out, Minnesota?
Yeah, so I'm actually in Nebraska, so like we were just having like a gathering there up in Minnesota for like it was kind of like a special event where we just had a bunch of people kind of travel from various places and stuff. So I made the drive out there, and we figured like, hey, well, I'm here, we might as well
do
try to do this. And it was hitting at a probably like a really opportune moment, in that we were all vaccinated, and I think the Delta stuff was there, but it definitely, even after I left, it felt like it had ramped up a lot in terms of like people taking a lot more precautions about that particular strain. So it felt like we hit like a decent needle in terms of like, okay, we can do this, and we're not as we don't feel as vulnerable about doing it. But
the mask mandates and stuff, they're all coming back. I mean, I live in Oklahoma, which is like, it's very, I guess to put it bluntly, very Republican state, and so it's a lot of not wanting to do mask mandates, a lot of not wanting to do things like that, just because the nature of our governor and whatnot. But even here, it's those things are coming back, like the mask mandates, strongly encouraging them, requiring them in federal areas and stuff. So it's scary, man. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do a round two, and it didn't even affect, you could probably say the same because you're in the Midwest, like me. But people in like LA, San Francisco, all the big hitters, people who work for IGN and stuff, like that affected them a lot more than it affected me, because I'm in the Midwest. And so like I could still go for a walk down the street, but that was like a thing that they couldn't do for a while there. So I really hope that we don't have to do 2.0.
Yeah, it's a combination of like I totally get the fatigue around like not wanting to quarantine anymore, and that kind of stuff, and seeing like theaters reopen in places like being able to get quote unquote back to normal. But there is still that concern of like, if this gets bad enough, we might have to, and it's just gonna. I don't think the public has it in them to do another round, and so that's gonna be really tricky going forward.
Yeah,
a lot of people just feel more about what they care about than people dying, which is sad.
It is very sad.
Yeah,
it is very sad.
Well, I want to go see a movie and sit next to someone and sneeze all over them, and
That's my hobby. It's just sneezing all over.
I contracted the virus back in December, and when I tell you, it's probably the worst thing I've ever had. I've had salmonella before. I've had bronchitis. I've had pneumonia, and this. I mean, this kicked my ass. And I'm a pretty healthy 24-year-old. I smoked for a little while, but like, there are times where I still get short-winded because of this disease that I had. So I can see how big of a concern this virus is.
Yeah, I got very lucky. Didn't get it. Got vaccinated, and if they roll out a second vaccine for the Delta variant, I'll be first in line. So I don't like to play around with that stuff. But I do want to ask you one of these questions. That we have here that actually kind of concerns COVID in that area, because board games and stuff, the tabletop genre is a little dependent on people getting, of course you got things like Tabletop Simulator and stuff, but if we're being completely honest, it's not the same. There's nothing like touching those cards in your hand and those little meeples and whatnot. But we have a bunch of questions in here for board games. What are some of your favorite board games that you've ever played in terms of tabletop games and whatnot?
Yeah, I think the standby that I have a lot is Codenames. I'm a big
Mm-hmm.
fan of that. Recently, we've my kind of like small group of friends is now basically all vaccinated, so we've only just gotten around now to like, hey, like, does everyone feel comfortable doing a board
Mm-hmm.
game night? And so that has been like a really good palate cleanse. Like, it's been kind of the warm up thing that ends up being the main event where you're like, okay, we bought a bunch of board games, we have them all here. Let's play some Codenames, and then we end up playing Codenames for 4 hours because people like we just don't enforce time restrictions at all. So
Yeah.
people are just thinking, and it's like a really great avenue for just having all these side conversations.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, oh right, we're still playing this board game. Like, have you thought about like the clue that is going to tie these 4 clues together? So it's just a really great game for just facilitating conversation but also being the structured thing. So I've been playing a lot of that, and I haven't gotten bored of it. I'm surprised at how much the basic setup of that game facilitates just like this random board of images you've seen before. Basically makes it feel like a brand new game. Like, just the idea of being able to play 2 games back to back by flipping the cards over and getting a completely new board.
Yeah.
I think it's such a powerful concept.
And there's many iterations of that game as well too. You
Yeah.
know, like with Disney and Marvel and all that stuff.
I
Yeah.
get my ass kicked by my fiance every single time we play the Harry Potter one. Every time.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever won that one.
Codenames is
sure.
a lapse in my board game knowledge. I still haven't got it.
It's really good. Like, I don't know how much the only ones that I've played are the pictures one and the regular version. And I think those 2 are compatible with each other, so you can mix and match those cards. But can you do that with some of the theme stuff? Do they say like, hey, you can just play it?
I'm not sure.
The only one I own is the Harry Potter one.
Okay.
I need to pick up a copy of it. I mean, Ben, of course, stands by that game as well. He talks about it a lot, but I've never actually. I think I've maybe played one round of it, but it got derailed by something. So that's one of the areas that I'm missing. I got a lot of stuff. I got a lot of board games, and I don't even know if I could pinpoint a personal favorite of mine, because it's like a weird thing, you know. You have this subsect of friends that want to play a specific type of board game, and then you have like this subsect of friends that want to play this specific type of board game, and there's kind of like maybe a little bit of overlap there, but usually not. Like, if I'm going to play with my girlfriend, I got to make sure it's like not too strategic, not too over the top, but if I'm going to play with, like, of course, like Mike, one of the co-hosts on the TCG cast, like, he wants to play something a little more intensive, a little more strategic and stuff. So it's hard to balance, especially with COVID, and then if you don't have like a really large friend group. But
you definitely have to like cater the games to the crowd, because I know that there's recently a friend of mine gifted another friend of mine the Game of Thrones board game, and he was in town, and so we decided to learn how to play it. And I think
that's an intense game.
I think that was definitely one of those games where like everyone was either a fan of the show or just was knowledgeable enough about similar games to be dedicated to learning it. And it definitely took us multiple nights to figure out, like, okay, what is the flow of this game, and how do you actually play it? And trying to figure that out. Whereas I think we just happened to have like the right group of people who were all committed to it, versus like, that's not a game you can bring to a party and say like, yeah, we'll just play a round of this, you know, like that's just not that game. So I think like Codenames, I think, works really well because it is so versatile, and the rules are simple enough to really just say like, yeah, I can teach you the rules in like a minute, you know, and then we start playing.
I just picked up I watch Shut Up and Sit Down. They do YouTube reviews of board games. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're a very enjoyable YouTube channel to watch. But they recently did a review on this game called Dream Crush, which is making the waves here in my household. Everyone's liking that one. It's kind of that same kind of vein of Codenames, you know, very like easy to understand, easy to get. The only stipulation on that one is you got to play with like a group of friends that like know each other really well for that one, because you're trying to build these characters with personalities that you would quote unquote that you would pick as your crush or whatever, and then you, based on like their personalities or some of their like some things that they do that you might not like, you know, like leave the toilet seat up or whatever. Like they create this weird whimsical combination of things, and then you got to try to guess like, oh, I think Tim would like this, I think Spencer would like this, and and then the most you guess correctly, the more you guess correctly, the more points you get. And so that one's been pretty fun. But it's hard to balance as someone who likes really intensive board games. Like I would like to sit there for, I played Twilight Imperium and very much enjoyed myself. Like it's a very intense 4-hour game. Like that's crazy. It's hard to balance that with the like more of my friend group who is a little more lax and not as strategic, like strategy intensive or board game intensive. So it's hard to find board games in that sweet spot where it's like, where you get like this can have real depth, but it also might be simple enough that everyone can enjoy it. Things like Ticket to Ride and whatnot. Like I love Ticket to Ride. That's one of my favorite games.
That's when you substitute card games. I know my family is not like we go to the beach every year, and we are not a family who wants to sit down and take 2 hours to read the directions of one board game. So instead, we'll bust out like 3 decks of cards and sit 15 people down on the table and play a card game.
Yeah, some of the classics like Spades and whatnot.
Spades, yeah. We play Gymnasta, which is Gin Rummy and Canasta combined. That game is fun.
I've never even heard of that. I've heard of Gin Rummy, but not.
We play
what?
Settlers of Catan. That's about the only board game that my family will play.
Yeah.
And half the time it's just them trying to block someone else in on the shore, so they can't build the roads anywhere else.
Catan is a classic. That's a really good game.
Catan is definitely like a really strong mix of this has an arc where it feels like you are playing something that people get invested in, like long-term progress, but without being so like rules based and like all this like having a ton of like basically bureaucracy that basically makes people check out with like
and
it's Monopoly.
It's a social game too. The ability to trade and kind of make deals together. I think that really adds to being able to get more strategic while not necessarily overstepping that line where people are like, man, I can't. Like my girlfriend has ADHD, so like when stuff like gets real intensive, she just completely checks out. She's I have no idea what's going on. I don't know the rules of this game. I'm just gonna lose, and I'm only gonna sit here because I love you. But like it's hard to ride that line. I think I'll pick up a copy of Codenames actually.
I just picked up Dice Stars. If y'all have heard of that one, it's like this really small game. You have 10 6-sided dice, I think, and you can pick up 2 or 3 at a time, and you roll them, and you either choose how many numbers of the same number you want or how many colors of the same color you want. Mark it down on like a grid-based score sheet, and you add up all your scores, and if you have X's, which take place instead of the ones, I think, you can add those to multiply your score at the end. It's a pretty simple game to pick up, but it's fun. We play that about
Yahtzee Plus,
once a week.
it sounds like. Dice Throne does the same thing, except for it's like fantasy. It's like Yahtzee, but fantasy. You're like casting spells and stuff. That stuff's cool. It's a very easy one to get into.
So I know with with COVID going on and being remote, have you tried any board games remotely? Because I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and my friend group does not want to get together and sit down and sweat in the living room for 6 hours. So we've decided to move to remote play, and I think that's one of the most difficult things to do is try to play something that's not video game based over like Discord or something.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that. I think D&D has always been a difficult one for me because I think the most fun I ever had with D&D was one where we didn't really do a lot of the combat stuff and just kind of did a lot of role play. So I that stuff is really fun, but it is also the hardest one to enjoy over Discord. So I haven't done a ton of D&D, but I have done a few sessions over Discord, and like they work well enough. It's like sort of like podcasting, where it's like I'm glad we were able to do it in the first place. But you definitely miss the option to do it over, just having it over drinks at someone's place.
Yeah, and then you wait 3 months to play the next session.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's always a big struggle. But when you were at home, like working from home and stuff, how did you manage your time between games you wanted to play, games you quote unquote had to play for your job, and like tabletop gaming and stuff like that?
I mean, I think a lot of it was choosing games based on what I like. Choosing games that overlapped on both. Like, I didn't play a ton of games that I was like not interested in for work after I basically at MinnMax, right? Like there were a few at Game Informer that were assigned, but I think for the most part, it was like the most you'd ever do with a lot of stuff like that was like, hey, do you think is this worth checking out long term? Do you want to do a review? So there were games where I just said like, I don't know that I'm really feeling it. Like I don't like, it's not that I dislike it. It's just like, it's just not a thing that I feel interested in or invested in. But with like bigger games, you kind of had to take that hit. So I feel like I kept my, kind of my concurrently playing stuff pretty low just to be able to maximize kind of like, I always felt like I was going from one game to the next in terms of reviews and stuff, but I think it's gotten a little healthier once I kind of wasn't doing it full time. And so like now it's just like I play and talk about the games that I'm interested in. And in terms of like mixing in board game stuff. I've only recently gotten into like board games as much as I'd like. Ben Hansen was actually pretty good about like every semester we had a round of interns, and so he would coordinate these board game nights at his place, and so like for a while we were on a pretty consistent clip of playing board games. A lot of it was Avalon.
I love that game.
Like, which is a good way to like kind of test people early on of just like, okay, what kind of person are you? And to the point where it's like now it is a little bit stressful. Of just like I play this game so much that it is always this thing of like there is this amount of tension between people when you're playing Avalon of like, do I actually want to trust this person? And like you do have to make an effort to let stuff go of just like, okay, this person betrayed me in this one round. Like they're not my enemy. I can't just like let that linger and be mad at this person outside of this game. Like it's like life is too short for that.
Yeah.
But that definitely was like a good clip of like, okay, I'm gonna get to see people and I'm gonna get to play this game, and that's actually how I discovered Codenames. So like for a while there, we had a really consistent group of people that we played board games with, and now that I'm here, like I'm able to like maybe twice a month play games with friends and stuff. So it's been getting healthier for sure.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask, do you ever substitute any board games for like the Jackbox party packs?
We like that was a Discord one that we did a lot of. It's very easy to stream. Just have get a Discord call going and have one person kind of stream the entire experience. So that worked pretty well. We did that for a little while. So like, and I think those games are really good at like teaching you the rules really quickly and being very like pick up and play.
Doesn't get any better than Murder Trivia in my opinion. So good. I love Murder Trivia.
There's the one that's sort of like Avalon where you pick out the imposter. I don't know if y'all played that one.
Yeah. It's the one where someone gets different prompts, right? And they're like the imposter.
Oh,
Faking it. That's the one. Yeah. Drawful's always a classic too.
Yeah, I'm a big Drawful. TKO guy. I like that a lot.
TKO was. I almost ordered a shirt from TKO.
We ordered one actually. It's very funny. Does the nature of this is always something I've been curious of, and I guess they've probably answered it a million times, just people in the games industry. But does the nature of being like assigned video games to be played, like when you worked at Game Informer, does that change? Like, are you having to go into that with a different kind of view of like, okay, I'm being quote unquote forced to do this, so I got to make sure the fact that I might be playing it when I don't want to doesn't affect my review of this thing. Like, does that change the way you view the games that you're playing? Like, because I know it does for me. Like, I do the podcast. We have a film cast version where we rank movies every week, and sometimes it kind of sucks. I'm like, I don't really want to watch this, but I need to for the podcast, for the content. But it's always it's a fine line of like, I can't allow this to change the objective or subjective view of the film just because I have to do it. So does that apply to the video games that you're assigned to play, like when you worked at Game Informer or anything?
I also have something to follow with it. Does that affect how often like you drop a game as well too, or how fast you would drop a game?
I think when you're reviewing it, I think being assigned a game definitely like alters your experience of it, because I think one of the things that people kind of take for granted about this line of work, which is like a champagne problem, is the idea that like the moment you are assigned something, it meaningfully alters your relationship to it, right? Like you are playing it for work, and whether it's not like it, I've loved the hell out of games I was assigned, but they were still work. And so the best thing you can do is like not hide that, obviously like be honest with yourself about it, but you do have to remind yourself that like there are things that are frustrating because you need to hit deadline or whatever, and it is just about asking yourself like if I didn't have a time limit effectively, like how frustrating would this be, right? And or like how would that change my relationship to it? But there are like I think there are ways that some like flaws or whatever in a game end up manifesting differently. So like something like, well, there's just a lot of filler content in this game that is not great and frustrating and kind of like boring, and it's like tedious to work through it to get to the good stuff, right? And that is maybe the like game reviewer version of that complaint. But I think it would manifest in like if you were just playing it normally by you just got bored of it and stopped playing, right? So um your relationship is different in that you were forced to play all of it and it wasn't great, but like that flaw is still there. It just like depending on how you play it or how you view games, you're just going to react to it differently. So that it is kind of like having that check of like, okay, putting aside that stuff, do you think this is a valid complaint? And that's kind of where you just have to realize that it is a subjective experience. There's no like correct review. It is just like, well, here's my experience, and like the idea is that at this point, I feel confident enough in my ability to kind of parse that stuff well enough to say like, yeah, like I am playing it under a deadline, but these flaws are still there. Like there is still like, those flaws are there. It's just like, yeah, normally I would have just put it down. Right?
Would you consider that a plus side to having had moved to more freelance stuff now because you don't work at GI like you were saying at the beginning earlier about how you play more of what you enjoy now? So does that feel like a I don't want to say bonus to having lost your job, but like you get what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I think the relationship is a little healthier in that I don't necessarily play games unless I'm interested in them at this point, because I just feel like that is just a healthier place to come in with the criticism. Like there are times where like you like I wouldn't say that I wanted to play certain games, but that I like the job was like, okay, that'll be an interesting one to talk about. So something like I'm not like a huge fan of like Naughty Dog games, for example, but like I wouldn't say that I like felt like I had to play The Last of Us Part 2, but looking at like release calendars and stuff, it's like that'll be one that I want to talk about for the job, right? That is an interesting game to dig into. But like if I weren't doing the job, I would probably just wait for a sale. I wouldn't be like one of those people who's like, well, I got to line up for this and play it day one. But I think that that was like that was a game that was more fascinating to kind of talk about, right? Like that I think is very interesting to talk about. But that was maybe the closest that I ever got to playing a game that I wouldn't have played otherwise. But I maybe would have still played it, just not at release and having part of the discourse or whatever.
What's that that transition that you had from going from GI to more freelancing stuff, like more like MinnMax and stuff? What was that transition like to have to go from something more stable to something? I've never done freelance. I mean I've only had 2 jobs in my life. I worked in McDonald's and then the post office, very stable, straightforward jobs, and I understand that freelancing is a bit more chaotic, kind of cutthroat, as they say. What was that? What was that like?
Yeah, it was well. I had done a ton of freelance before, and it was definitely easier the second time around, just because I had built up more contacts, and there were just a lot of emails that were a little bit more casual about like, yeah, I know who you are, like yeah, reach out, or people reach out to me, and like I kind of was able to get that work quickly. But the big thing was that like I also was able to do kind of larger projects, and I ended up not writing a ton of features. I mostly focused on reviews, but that was definitely one of those things where it kind of helped my relationship to games, that I was able to take a step back and say like, I'm going to cover the games that I'm interested in and not necessarily the ones that I feel like compelled to cover, or like that I feel like I have to be up on the discourse or whatever. So I think that was the biggest transition, was thinking about like, do this because you want to, not necessarily feel you have to.
Yeah, Imran probably shares that same sentiment. I listen to him over on Kind of Funny and stuff, and he comes over occasionally and does some other podcasts that I listen to. But that's like a sentiment that he talks about as well. Having going to Fanbyte now and doing the stuff at Fanbyte, he's really enjoying it. Like just the freedom, I guess he says, of just I can kind of just write about what I want to write about because this website isn't like traditional, and I don't have like big corporate overlord like telling me what to do. I guess, but I guess that's I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of websites I think that are in that realm are kind of shifting more towards like I think you still see sites covering stuff when it gets popular.
Mm-hmm.
Like people will solicit things like, hey, um, if you're playing Pokemon Unite, pitch us something, and that's maybe a smarter way to do it. To say like to solicit freelance work about stuff about games that are popular, for like SEO and stuff, to people
Mm-hmm.
who are already interested versus like having staff be like, okay, well, this game is popular, so we have to talk about it so that people will visit the website, and we have this limited roster, so someone from this roster has to cover this game, right? Versus like
Mm-hmm.
if you're already passionate about that stuff, then come to us, and then you can cover the game that you like, right? And I think that ends up making for better, more detailed coverage. But then that also gets into like, well, freelance rates are better than they used to be, but still, it is still hard to make a livable wage
Mm-hmm.
out of putting together different freelance stuff.
So when you review a game, what's like the percentage of that game you have to complete before you feel validated enough in your opinion to write a review?
I usually tend to finish it. I haven't had a situation where I was not able to finish a game, so I tend to like to finish a game. Um, and I think it depends on the game. So something like I actually ended up not reviewing fighting games just because like I didn't like playing fighting games for a review just because it felt like, well, you're playing it for week one, but like you're just playing the week one version of this game. This game is going to be very different even the week after as people discover stuff and the meta changes or whatever. But for something like multiplayer games, that is kind of different. So you just kind of have to pick a moment, right, of when you're satisfied with it. And I don't necessarily like, as long as you are being honest about what your experience was, I think it's totally fine if you want to say like, hey, I wasn't able to finish, or like I only got through however much of the game. As long as you lay that out in the review, I think that's totally fine to not have to finish it, because like that is like one of the things about games that is makes them harder to review, right? Like they're really long. It's like having to review 7 seasons of The Office the day that show begins, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
on some level it's like, yeah, like you're evaluating a holistic work, but it's like the average experience of a lot of people, maybe The Office is a bad example because I think a lot of people do end up finishing it, but like if you don't like a show, you don't sit there and watch every season, right?
No.
Like if you don't like something like, for example, Supernatural, right? Like if you get like 10 episodes in and you're like, I'm not really feeling this, you just move on to something else. And then like, and I think it's totally acceptable if you're going back and reviewing something like that you say like, yeah, I got into the first season and kind of fell off. That's my experience with it. Here's why. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a totally valid review of that show. So I think a similar case can be made for games of like, yeah, this game's just not doing it for me, or what, for whatever reason, wasn't able to
Mm-hmm.
finish. But
Yeah, because
I think it is about being honest about that stuff and saying like, hey, here's how far I got in. I think GameSpot did a pretty good job of, or it still does, obviously, of like having things at the end of the review that said like, this player played this much of the game, uh, and that is their experience. Like as long as you're able to lay it out, I think it's totally fine.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I know
I,
Tim over listening to the podcast. They do Game Pass Club,
mm-hmm.
and this week we played The Ascent. That was our Game Pass Club game to play, and I played about 5 hours of it, and then I submitted my review over in the Discord. And then
Mm-hmm.
after submitting my review, I'm like, I've only played 5 hours of this game that could be like a 60-hour narrative. So I wanted to get your take on like, what's that cutoff for where you feel that your review has been solidified?
Yeah, I think those are different reviews, right? Like the
Yeah.
game that a review that talks about the first 5 hours is totally valid. And honestly, like the difference between 5 and 60 hours is kind of like less about, oh, make sure you cover everything, and more about being able to have more refining kind of where you think problems are coming from, and like obviously a lot of games have progression systems, so like well, it looks like it might be interesting over long term, but maybe the progression just kind of peters out and you unlock everything by the end of the game really quickly, or maybe you do actually have to make decisions about how you spec the skill tree or whatever. But I think those are both perfectly valid reviews because like time is short and you don't necessarily like if you're not being if you're not being paid to do it, or you're not a full-time employee, then it's like a lot of people just aren't going to get to the end of a game all the time.
I think for us specifically, me and Spencer, like I do this synced up podcast, and we got 30-40 people that listen every week. It's a lot. I think it's a lot more acceptable and easier for us to do something in that vein. Say, okay, I played the Ascent. I played the Ascent for an hour and a half, and I'm gonna talk about it on our next episode. I didn't like it. I'm not gonna play anymore, but I'm still gonna talk about it as part of the game club. And I think that's easier for our fans and the people who watch our show, the 30 or 40 of them, to digest and enjoy. It's a little more difficult though, I think, in the bigger space at the IGNs and stuff, because there's a mob of people ready to crucify you at every turn for not having done specific things. So I very much agree with you though. I think that's a valid review as long as you put in the review, hey, I didn't do this, I didn't touch this. Like I can't remember the girl who did I don't remember what site it was for, but it was the Cyberpunk review where she said, I didn't do any of the cop missions or any of that, but this game wasn't really popping off. I didn't really like it that much. And then, the public at large was ready to be like, oh, well, you didn't do everything, so you can't say anything bad about our Messiah, Cyberpunk 2077. So I do agree though. I think it's very valid to just be able to be like, okay, look, I played this much. I wasn't vibing with this section. I made it halfway through. I'm gonna be honest with that up front, and then take what you want from what I'm saying. And if you want to play it and go further than that, go ahead. And if not, then that's fine.
Yeah, and like think about how pointed a lot of that stuff is, right? Like it's never about like, well, you didn't do whatever content, but hey, you still liked it. That's great. Like I'm not like, people don't come out of the woodwork to criticize you if they agree with you in the first place. So all that stuff is just like meant to kind of find weaknesses in the review when you disagree with it, versus actually being upset about like whatever the thoroughness or the process of actually reviewing a game, right? So like if that person had given Cyberpunk a 10, it's like, I didn't do all the stuff, but I loved what I played, I don't think that would have been as common. Like those comments don't happen as frequently.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, and again, it's like if they didn't feel compelled to do that content and said like, hey, I wasn't vibing with it, so I didn't do all of the cop missions, I think that says something about the game, that they don't feel compelled to do stuff like so like there are things where I reviewed Hades for GameSpot, right? And I got to the true ending for that, but there is like an epilogue, right? There's a thing that takes for like a lot longer to get to, and it's not feasible. Like, and that is like credits roll again, right? So it's like you can say like, you have not experienced the entire game unless you have done that, or like there's a whole like post game thing of like the heat system, right? That is like explicitly a post game thing that you're not meant to access until you've beaten the game. And so like there's like, games are weird in that like you don't get to the end of a game and it's like you have seen all there is, right? So games are kind of stratified and everyone just picks how engaged they are. So I think it is in line with how people experience games to say like, well, this is how I decided to engage with the game. Like did you just beat Hades one time? Did you just beat it 10 times? Like those are both valid kind of points to stop, or like even if you just I couldn't beat the game, so like here's my experience with that, right?
I think that's just an archaic thing. Personally, I think that's more of a modern thing for video games to not be over once they're over. Modern is in like the last 15 years, so I don't know if it's just video games themselves, they're a young industry, they're a young hobby, and so I personally think it's just rollover from the past. Like back in the day, you beat a game and you beat a game and that was it. The classic, Call of Duty's bad because they add stuff afterwards and they make you pay for it when it should have been in the game in the first place. I think those are all like just archaic ways of thinking in the gaming industry, but there hasn't been enough time because gaming has evolved so quickly that there hasn't been enough time in between all of that to really showcase it. Because I think, again, like you were saying, like that stuff is there for those people who want to get it, and that's great. But I don't think your opinion or your view of the game is necessarily lessened because you didn't explore the heat system or you didn't do whatever. Like, you got the true ending. You've seen the true ending. You've seen the majority of what the game has to offer, and then you can give your opinion on that game. And if you were super into this game, then go ahead and go for the even extra stuff. But I don't think that extra stuff is necessary to be able to talk about a game or to give an opinion on a game.
Yeah, and I think to going back to what you said about like it being this archaic form of thinking, I think there is still this weird like game enthusiast thing of like, well, the reviews are kind of the final word on a game, which that I think, the way social media has evolved conversations about all media, that's really less and less the case, where reviews feels like more and more of like, this is what we thought when the game came out, like this is where opinions are at. And I think that like opinions on games have shifted, and like, you hear about like, oh well, like reviews were really high for this one game, but like as more people got their hands on it, like the conversation around those games changed. Like something like Cyberpunk reviewed pretty well, but you don't hear people talking about it anymore.
No.
It's not the game that people and that has happened with other games. Something like BioShock Infinite reviewed incredibly well.
What a good game.
Like that is a game that like there was a really strong backlash, and now like that game's reception, I think in hindsight, is mixed among a lot of people. And I was one of those people who loved that game.
It's a cult classic at this point.
Right. It almost feels like you are like supporting like an everyman when you're like talking like, well, you know what, I like BioShock Infinite. This like you have to say it in that with that tense of like, I liked it.
I like this
game.
game.
Meanwhile, like if you look at what the final word is on that game, it's like a 95 on Metacritic, right? So it's like it feels weird to have to defend that game, but that is like the reviews are just kind of one axis of like how people receive a game now. So like the protectiveness around like, well, if this person says the game is bad, then I can't enjoy it, like it's just totally wrongheaded.
So I think Skyward Sword fits in that same mold as well.
Yeah,
reviewed 10s back in the day, and then 7s in the middle there when everyone was like, wow, we shouldn't have gave it a 10. And then I think now people view it a little more better, a little more mixed instead.
Yeah, I think I mean, like, and that can also shift completely the other way, right? Like something like Nier, you look at the reviews for that initial game and they were pretty mixed. And so now, and like that remaster, I mean, it obviously like it smooths out some of the edges and stuff, but not to the degree that people I think are kind of praising the game now in hindsight, right? Of like, oh, this game was actually really good, and they made it better.
People are screaming from the mountaintops to play that game now at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So like, it's like, oh yeah, it's like this. It's not just a diamond in the rough. It is like another masterpiece from Yoko Taro. And like Skyward Sword is kind of this other thing where it's like, it has this really negative reception at like post release, and now it feels like reviews have felt like, well, like some of them are like, yeah, this game's kind of bad. Like it's not as it's not as good as people thought then. But there is like, I think my reviews maybe in that spectrum of like acting as a bit of a redemption arc for like, yeah, I know like everyone kind of, this is the Zelda that people dislike the most, but like there is some good stuff here, right? And so like, and that is just a case of how conversations around games evolve, and why people should take reviews less seriously, which is weird to say as someone who reviews games and in a way that wants to take them seriously. Is like, okay, if you don't agree with the review, that's fine. You can just read another one, write your own, or look at other opinions, right?
Yeah, I think that's why I've begun to lean more towards reviews that are, I don't know, a little bit more, I don't know what the phrase is, less, there's this in the game, there's this in the game, this isn't in the game, this isn't in the game, and more just like analyzing things, and more just like talking about interesting, I don't know, philosophical things, more like, what does this mean? What is, things like that. I tend to lean in that direction. If I'm even reading a review, I mean, doing the pod now for a year and a half, I'm more like, okay, I just got to play it all, no matter what anybody says, just to be able to make the content, which is interesting. But definitely don't take the reviews as the end all be all, especially because you can see so many with the internet and the way things are and all these startup sites and stuff. You can see so many different opinions from so many different opposite sides of the spectrum. You can get a quote unquote review from like you guys at MinnMax, which you wouldn't necessarily say it's a review, but you guys are just talking about a game that you like or didn't like, and it's still kind of a review, just not in the traditional sense. So if you want to go read an article on IGN, or you want to go get it from a podcast, or you want to watch a YouTube breakdown or a video essay, like there's so many different ways to get opinions on games nowadays that
Yeah.
definitely not the end all be all.
Yeah. Any individual opinion is kind of it's a lot easier now to feel like you can kind of explore a little bit. And like as one of the people writing that kind of stuff, it feels more like, hey, you are a little bit incentivized to not write the breakdown review, because it's like, yeah, people read them and they're oh, I agree with this, but I think the reviews that end up getting the most traction, that people remember most, are games that feel like they got to the core of the game, like one way or the other, even if they didn't like, discuss the multiplayer, right? Like uh like game reviews that feel like they're talking about the game as like a critical object and not just like a series of features. I feel like those are always, to me, more interesting and more memorable to read.
Yeah. Things like Leo's videos, I guess sometimes you could consider would be a review, but just in a very, very backwards way.
Yeah. It's just like it is talking about, whatever critically, but you end up remembering that stuff more because it's not just like, well, here's like a kind of a boilerplate list that feels like it is just tackling X number of bullet points because that's how a review works, right? If you have a larger thesis, I think like the most interesting reviews are always ones that have like a really strong central thesis of like, this game is about this, or like, this is kind of my core experience with this game. And then everything else reinforces that point, instead of saying, anyway, moving on to the soundtrack. Yeah. I don't like. There's just not a lot of here. Like, I will say that, like, as a side tangent, I think it's hard for a lot of reviewers to talk about the soundtrack because it just always feels like a tangent.
Yeah.
But like, if you can incorporate it into the review, that's always great. But like, yeah, like having those transitions of like, well, now I'm gonna talk about this other thing, always feels like it just stops a review dead in its tracks. So it's like there are if that particular part of a game, or for some part of the game, didn't really particularly impact you, like, there's no need to mention it.
Yeah.
Speaking of reviews, what got you into like games journalism and all that?
I mean, honestly, it was probably podcasts of just listening to people behind, some like, because I would read stuff like Nintendo Power, and Game Informer, and just like, okay, well, here's, like that old school thinking of like, here's the verdict on these games, whether I shouldn't buy them or not. But then listening to podcasts and realizing that actual people did that stuff, it felt like I had always wanted to be some form of writer. I think I knew early on that I liked writing and I liked reading, and so like my plan was always to do something that involved writing, and I also really like video games, so it felt like the idea of people, being on podcasts and talking about like, here's our process and here's what I was doing in the office this week or whatever, kind of crystallized like, oh, this is a job that people can do. So like, and it combines my two favorite things, writing and video games. So I guess I'll try to seek that out, and luckily it went fairly well for me. So
I think the internet has really broke down those walls just across the board, not just with video games, but with like everything, where you're like, oh, even like when we're talking about board games, like kids can now be like, oh, somebody made this, and that's a job. Like I could design board games for a living if I wanted to. I could do Kickstarter. I could do Patreon, like all these different ways. And I think that's been as much as we like to shit on the internet for being a plague sometimes of the stuff that happens on there, but also it's been a beautiful thing. I hearken it to like, I don't know, the invention of the car, the humans discovering how to harness fire. I feel like the internet is probably the most modern version of that type of thing. It's been very bad sometimes, but also very great.
Yeah, I feel really grateful now that I feel like I got into even like Twitter when I did, because it felt like now it just feels impossible to start out and stand out among the crowd. It just feels
very difficult.
You would have to have like so much more talent, and like a combination of that and like a breakout kind of thing, especially if you're working on YouTube, which
and money.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and have the freedom to be able to pursue it. Whereas I feel like I just had a pretty good time, like just following writers on Twitter, and like it wasn't as crowded or as awful as it is now, and it felt like I was able to have actual conversations that kind of led to like networking and being able to talk to editors and reach out to them and actually start kind of building my bona fides that way. Versus now, it just seems like it would be pretty difficult to get started.
It's Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very disheartening sometimes. I've gotten to where now, like, even being on here talking to you feels like feels like a, I don't know, like a fever dream or surreal
Yeah,
almost,
and
where it's like, oh, we shot for the moon, and no offense, obviously you're not the moon, but it feels that way because you are so many levels
Sure.
higher
you,
above us, of course.
you're the moon
Um,
here.
yeah, hit the moon here. But like, it feels that way, and it's so difficult to ever, I don't know, make progress. So you're constantly switching things up or tweeting at people or just doing as much as you possibly can. And it's hard to keep that energy constant all the time. And so
Mhm.
nowadays I've gotten to where, of course we did the sponsorship Patreon thing of MinnMax back in November of last year. For my podcast, and that was really cool. We got a bunch of people to come over from that, and
Nice.
I
Ben
was one of
Hansen,
them.
yeah, Ben Hansen gave the feedback and all that, and we really appreciated that. And now we have 30 or 40 consistent people, and then we got a Patreon that makes $45 a month, and $45 a month might not sound like anything, but to someone like me who is negative a lot, that feels like a ton. It's like, oh, we're doing something, and so
Yeah.
it's very difficult to keep that going. But I don't know. I think it's just a combination of persistence and you know not necessarily luck, but like there'll be a thing that pops up, and because you were so persistent, you managed to land in that
Yeah.
spot. And so, but it's very difficult to do. But I've gotten to where I've stopped looking at views and likes and downloads and stuff because it was killing me. It's like, man, I'm a year and a half in. I spent all this money, and somehow this is as high as it's gotten. It feels like I should have more returns. Like I'm putting the work in. I'm reading books on lighting, and I'm reading books on like what you're supposed to do. I'm listening to interviews about the best way to break out and social media marketing and stuff. And then it's like, how have we not got more views? But it was just starting to like mentally affect me. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to sit back. I'm going to do this show. I'm going to get 30 people to listen to the video game podcast. I'm going to get 5 people to listen to the movie podcast. But those 5 people, they're going to have a good time. And I'm not going to look at the numbers and know that it's 5 people. And I'm just going to talk like I'm talking to the world. And that's really done wonders for me. It's like, it being more fun. But it's definitely difficult to break out in the modern age. I feel like because it's so easy for everyone to do it, everyone's doing it. So it's like it's hard to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, what would you say like the hardest part was trying to dip into like video games journalism and all that? Because I know for me running this podcast, setting up is easy, recording is easy, knowing what I want to talk about is easy. But like I think the biggest thing was like networking, like you mentioned before. Like I sent you a DM, and I sat there and crossed my fingers. I was like, maybe he reads it in a year, maybe he doesn't. But hopefully, if he reads it, he's all on board. And luckily you said yes. And I was like, I was dumbfounded that we could even like reach out to you, and that you
Nice.
responded. Like I was so impressed. But I think that's like one of the biggest challenges. So like, what was one of the biggest challenges like dipping into the journalism field?
I mean, I think the biggest thing was just like putting up with rejection and like having that persistence of like every time it feels like you fail at something or like are rejected, it just feels like you have to check with yourself again of do I still want to do this, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have that gut check of like maybe I should shift to something else, and it depends on what that thing is, but having to you know like face that adversity and say like okay, well I'm gonna keep going anyway because I still like doing this, and or not doing that. Like I think shortly after the layoffs at Game Informer, I started kind of doing these solo streams, and they like I was getting maybe like 10 viewers, which was fine. Like I'm like which I was grateful for, but I think ultimately I like it wasn't necessarily like a failure, but it felt like okay, I don't know that I necessarily want to keep kind of building this thing organically on my own.
Mm-hmm.
Like I didn't find it personally satisfying because I've always been more of a writer, so it definitely felt like I should probably refocus my efforts on something else. Whereas I think if I had like let's say out of the gate like 100 viewers or something big, I maybe that might have not gone as well for me because it felt like oh well I have this audience so I may as well keep growing it, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily have found out as quickly that like I wasn't in streaming for the long haul in terms of like me being a solo streamer every day,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. Um, so like failure can sometimes help, but I think in terms of if you're really passionate about something and uh, it just seems like either you're writing something and no one seems to care, or like you apply for a place and they say like we're actually not, or like they don't even respond, like right, like those are the worst ones of just like the anxiety of I sent them a thing and they never got back to me. So it's kind of like that kind of lingering hope of like maybe at some point they'll just read it is even worse than being told no. But like every time it's just like you have to have that quick gut check of like, okay, well, so what do you do now? Like, do you still want to do this or do you want to move on to something else? And like, luckily for the most part, I've been able to say like, no, I still want to do something in this field, you know?
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
Yeah, I come from I sell Aflac insurance for like 2 years, and the biggest thing that I took away from that was you will hear no 99% of the time, but that 1% you can make something spectacular out of. So like when I DM'd you on Twitter, I was like, there's no way in hell that he'll sit down and talk with us nerds. and then you read it. And I'm like, okay, you read it. That's probably a no. I'll move on into the next one. And I don't know if you were busy or just, disregarded it that day. But then you responded the next day and you said yes. And I'm like, there's that 1% that I learned about while in sales that I can make this huge opportunity out of.
Yeah. And even no's, like you were saying, them not reading it feels worse. It definitely does, because even a no is an acknowledgement. And so even the acknowledgement is like, yes, I did it. That's a small victory in my eyes. So they even thought about me enough to say no. So not getting a no definitely hurts. We used to send out so many more emails to be like, hey, can we get your game early? Can we talk? Can we interview you about your game? And I stuck to the smaller devs, people like the guy who's making Tunic, the people making like Potionomics and stuff like that, because I was like, hey, I'm a small guy. I can leverage the fact that I'm a small guy. You're a small guy. Let's be small guys together. Let's just talk about this thing that you have that I'm probably going to love. And it very rarely did anything ever come of that. And it's like, we're small guys, man. You could tell me no, that would be okay. But it sucks. It sucks definitely.
Yeah, I've had a couple no's. Like I've reached out to people. I'm like, hey, we do this community spotlight program that we rolled out. I really enjoy doing it. I love sitting down with the community. I love talking to people. And I've heard a few no's. And the first no I got, I was like, okay, do I want to continue doing this? Like you said, Suriel. And I was like, I absolutely want to continue doing this. And so I sent out like 5 more DMs. I've sent out a few emails the next day. And then next week, I landed an interview with a dev team working on one of a TCG game, Rifters. And I was like, wow, that's amazing that they even acknowledged it. But yeah, I think like you said, is you have to keep asking yourself, do you want to keep doing this? And
you definitely shoot more than me. You shoot way more than me. Sometimes you send me stuff where I'm like, you were shooting for entirely too high. But I guess it's still worth doing.
My first tweet for this program was out to Post Malone. And I was like, Post Malone, I want to get you on the show. I want to interview you about trading card games. Yeah. And nothing. I think one person liked it, and that one person was me.
Yeah, you had a lot of energy there.
Yep.
Because you were like, all right, I'm gonna get Greg Miller on your show, and I was like, oh, relax.
I was like, all right, that no is a future yes.
Maybe.
Yep.
You never know.
Yeah. One of my burning questions is, what's it like to have worked with so many bins?
It's been pretty good. I think we had multiple people in the Game Informer offices that we had to talk about by their last names. I think we had 2 Bens. We had we had 3 Jeffs at one point. We had 2 Andys, although it helped that I think we called one Reiner, Andrew Reiner, and then the other one was Andy, so it kind of helped differentiate them. But there was definitely been a lot of okay, we have to talk we have to use last names a lot because it's a lot easier.
Is Andy Mack as cool of a guy as he seems?
Oh, he's totally probably my favorite boss that I've worked for.
Really?
He was such a.
He seems like such a cool guy.
Yeah, he's such a I feel like more so than anyone in a position of his tier now, running EA's kind of larger games program, and it feels like I feel confident that he gets it, that he is one of those people who understands games and is able to kind of both factor in the idea of well, we have to do this because we need to, but also being yeah, but let's not do that because that sucks.
Yeah.
I feel like he was able to find this really strong balance between those two ends in a way that was just really, really good to work with. And it just felt like he was a fairly, he was one of those bosses that just trusted people enough to kind of let them work
Mhm.
and just say like, yeah, like whatever you need, have at it. Just like we'll check in later. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, sure. Like he was very amenable to like random pitches and stuff about random topics for the magazine.
He's also someone I would consider personally. I would consider Andy Mack like a legend, I guess, in
Yeah,
the gaming
absolutely.
industry. And that was the thing. When it was announced that Ben was leaving, obviously I was sad. And then he was like, "Oh, I'm starting Minn Max," and then I wasn't sad. But then Andy was like, "I'm gonna pick up the show for a while over at Game Informer," and I was like, "Yeah, let's go. Like, give me some of those tidbits." And it took a while there for him to finally. Like, especially in some of those episodes where people would talk to him and they'd be like, "Look, Andy, like like you have all these stories that everybody wants to hear." He's like, "Ah, nobody wants to hear those," but like, no, everybody wants to hear these things. You've done some crazy things and been in crazy places. Like, come on, man. Like, wow, you're a legend in the industry. You've been in here forever, longer than most
Yeah,
people. So
absolutely. And it was weird. It was wild meeting him, and then like being able to call him a coworker was definitely like, or like my boss even was very strange and very wild. And I yeah, nothing but respect for Andy Mack.
Have you met Matt Helgeson in person before?
Yeah, we he like at during the Game Informer days, I think we had a couple like chance encounters where I wasn't sure if I don't remember if he swung by the office or if we just happened to have a thing where everyone was coming in. I think it might have been for Extra Life at one point where he was there, that we got to hang out. But yeah, that was also a pretty cool thing, just meeting some of the older editors.
Yeah, he was the first. I think I started listening to the GI show when he was host over there.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that kept me in was his voice. I think he has the most radio-esque voice I've ever heard in my entire life. And I wish I could just hear him talk all day. Like, I want that to be the voice in my head. Not my own voice. I want Matt Helgeson's voice in my head. Narrating everything for me.
Yeah, wow.
Wonder if you could teach yourself to do that. To just have to talk to someone else. Talk to
think
yourself
in
someone else's voice. Yeah.
Yeah.
You probably could. Like,
I mean, when I read, I sometimes try to read in different voices, but that's only when I read. Like, if I'm thinking of something, I'm usually thinking in my own voice.
Hey, no reason not to try.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it a couple weeks. You might be able to pull it off.
Give me a year, I'll let you know.
But that's all I don't have any more questions left. I don't know if you got anything else.
Yeah. What
Spencer,
restaurant has your favorite cheeseburger?
What restaurant is my favorite cheeseburger? Gosh, there's a place in Vegas because I used to go to Evo for once a year basically. There was I don't remember what the name of the restaurant is, but they had this thing called the Sin City Burger, which I think was like might have been like some sort of PF Chang, like one of those kind of like higher tier places or whatever that Wolfgang Puck's kind of place, but they had like a Vegas specific thing. It was called the Sin City Burger, and I think that's maybe my favorite burger that I've ever had. But there's also a place in Minneapolis called Parlor that has like these like pretty sizable burgers that it's just like very simple, like here's ground chuck, here's cheese, and here's like pickles, and it's like you can just eat those without any other toppings on it because the seasonings on that thing are so good. In terms of fast food stuff, it's probably Hardee's. I think Hardee's has my favorite
Western
like,
bacon cheese, bro. Western bacon cheese, so good. I recently, like 4 or 5 months ago, developed a lactose intolerance, so now my life's terrible. I can't have cheese or anything, or milk. I used to drink chocolate milk with everything. That's probably why I developed a lactose intolerance. But now my life is in shambles. So cheeseburgers, I got a aversion to cheeseburgers nowadays. But sometimes I suffer through. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? I know I'm not supposed to eat this mac and cheese, but I'm gonna do it anyway, because it's gonna be delicious.
I feel like I maybe developed like a slighter version of that where it's just like, yeah, I don't know that I can have regular milk anymore, but the occasional like cheese sandwich I think is fine, but like I definitely have to switch to either like almond milk or lactate milk.
Yeah,
years, which is messed up. I like the fact that
you
develop that kind of thing.
It
sucks. You can develop allergies or conditions that
later on.
When you were a kid, you were like, oh, thank God I don't have a peanut allergy. The fact
and then all of a sudden it pops up.
Yeah, you're like, what the hell? No one prepared for this.
I know, I was so mad. Now I gotta drink weird milks. I want to like eat cereal and stuff all the time because I used to eat a lot of cereal, and I'm like, can't man, can't eat this. It sucks. Yeah, it definitely sucks.
I think I developed like the same thing, and then that just slowly evolved into irritable bowel syndrome.
Oh, dude, that's
what you get to look out for now.
No,
like I can drink all the milk I want, but no matter what goes in, it is gonna come out at the most random time.
Oh no.
in the day.
I thought that's what I had originally, and I was very scared because like eating or drinking like soda and stuff or anything like that can like mess that up. And so I was looking into stuff, and of course you go to like Mayo Clinic or whatever it is, and you're like, I got intestinal cancer. So you're trying to figure out like what it is, and irritable bowel syndrome like hit all the marks, and I was like, please do not let it be this. But no, I'm just lactose intolerant, which also sucks because I love dairy so much. All right.
You have any questions for us, Suriel?
No, I think you guys covered everything. I'm just happy to be here.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we loved having you on, and like I said, like you're the moon for us, and we'll keep shooting for the other stars too. But thanks so much for joining us today and being a great guest. And Tim, thank you for joining me. It's your first time on the cast, actually.
The first time on the cast. I know you tried to get me on here a bunch of times to talk about like Zelda and stuff.
You just keep swerving me.
I keep swerving you. I do. I got a lot going on, but yeah, first time on here. I had to get on for Suriel. I mean, let's go.
Exactly. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see y'all in the next one.